Welcome back to the National Security Hour. I'm Ed Huglin, your host this evening, with Dr. Yen as our special guest today, as we're talking about unrestricted warfare with a focus on the essential principles. As we left, we were talking about synchrony, and let's now move to the third essential principle, limited objectives. In the book, the authors say they set a compass guide to guide action with an acceptable range for measures that are available. Limited objectives means limited in relation to measures used. Limited objectives means limited in relation to measures used. When setting objectives, give full consideration to the feasibility of accomplishing them. Okay, I'll do a side note here. This is something the U.S. intelligence community and DoD should pay attention to. Feasibility of accomplishing them. Okay, we have to be able to accomplish your goals. What he notes here in the book, the officers do, is that they made a note about President Clinton at the time was unaware that national interest and sense of values are strategic objectives of two completely different scales. National interest and sense of values, two completely different scales and two different strategic objectives. And it says here and thereafter, we say that the former is an objective which American power can protect through action, okay, national interest. The latter, which is sense of values, is neither an objective that its power can achieve, nor is an objective which the United States should pursue outside its territory. World's number one, an ideology corresponding to isolationism, always makes the Americans tend to pursue unlimited objectives that expand a national power. This was more clear than evident in the Afghanistan war, all right? We did not set objectives. They were unlimited objectives, and the war was predominantly a cognitive war, but we fought it as a kinetic war. So from your perspective, Dr. Yin, limited objectives, what is your viewpoint on this in terms of essential principles?
Actually, sir, this is limited objective should combine thinking of it unlimited measures, as it mentions the next point here. So they talk about limited versus unlimited here to tell you that one principle is you have to know what is the most important targets, and you have to concentrate all the power, all the resources to guarantee you fully, totally destroy these important targets. So what does it mean? Just think about if they want to attack Washington, D.C. So then if some people live around Washington, D.C. in the community, that is not their main target if they can't handle all of that. But what they will fully attack is definitely the command and the military base, the White House, the Congress, the Hill, all these kind of target. And how to guarantee these limited objectives can be destroyed well, then they will use unlimited measures. That means they will understand all the structures using spies to gather all the maps and also the defense system in these objectives, and their like spy balloons or their drones. You know, there recently a lot of Chinese people were found or arrested by sending the drones all over the sensitive areas, right? They claim they're just having fun, but we know that for sure these are CCP's agents who are using drones to detect the details of that area, taking photos, deliver it back to China. China can use it to train their AI system, AI vehicles for the further attacks. And also they would unlimited, also including that their spies could install some kind of like bugging system or that kind of maybe dangerous before that kind of attack. Around the military base, they could embed the dangerous, very the weapons or whatever things to cause the damage at the same time when they launch the attacks, right? So unlimited include all the ways they could totally destroy the enemy's objective. And I think one term can be think about in this to understand this, that is the scorched earth. This kind of tactics are widely used in World War II and before, which means the whole earth become like burned nothing
Yes.
left. And that is what CCP want to achieve, nothing left. And you see that limited target, for example, they have helped Hamas get trained, right? Hamas top one leader, Mohammed Deif, was trained in PLA in 1990s, and his wife, one of his wife, is a spy between Hamas and CCP. So when they conduct this kind of massacres to Israel on 7th of October, the limited objectives are those villages, right? And unlimited massacre means people are all killed, kidnapped, tortured, and raped. All these kind of things happen to them. Almost no one can survive at this moment, right? So these are the examples of this kind of combine of tactics, which is anti-humanity.
No, so very, very good. So this is really, really key for people to understand here is what Dr. Yin's bringing in here is also the fourth aspect of the essential principles, unlimited measures here. But what's really interesting is a great example. You're talking about Hamas and the 7 October attack. The village was the limited objective. The scorched earth was nothing survives there. Okay. But for what purpose to what outcome? Okay, so they reached their objective, but what purpose, what outcome? Well, we've seen the results from that. It's a great example here of using this type of methodology of unrestricted warfare. Hamas still has their leadership in place. They're not all been decimated. They've gained thousands upon thousands of new allies. They've had people demonstrate for them worldwide, okay, based on the false propaganda that they pushed out in concert with this. And this is part of the omnidirectionality, the propaganda in line with these other things, blaming Israel and such like that. Okay. And then they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars for their cause. So even if they wiped out the Hamas leadership, current Hamas leadership, with the indoctrination of generations of young Palestinians, they've advanced even a stronger army potentially. Okay. So what's concerning here, what I think Americans need to pay attention to here is take a look at our leadership and take a look at how the omnidirectionality, the limited objectives, and the unlimited measures apply here. In my book, The Cognitive War, Why We Are Losing and How We Can Win, I have what I call a lone wolf scenario. And to Dr. Yen's point, we now have over 107,000 Chinese military-aged men in the United States. They've been making incursions onto military bases and other places purposely. Okay. They're doing reconnaissance. They're planning for things, right? We already know that China has tried to implant and probably successfully in our infrastructure, our water systems, electrical systems, and other stuff, different cyber effects. All right. So now think about the use of drones, for example. And in my lone wolf scenario, as the State of the Union gets out and moves, China's already mapped the IP addresses for the phones of the members of Congress, key congressional leadership, key members of the White House, key members of the military, right? Now think what they could do with the 107,000 deployed assets across the United States, or just in the Washington, D.C. area, a small portion of those, with DJI drones armed with C4 explosive and knowing what their IP addresses are, which they can get off of publicly available information websites to pay for the data. In concert with that, as they assassinate our top leadership in the military, in the White House, they undertake logistics efforts to then basically destroy our basic supply chain and resources from gas, oil, electricity. Okay. And think of this in the middle of the winter. Okay. That's scorched earth. Now, people will say that's impossible. No, but that's why we need to understand this is not impossible. This is a very realistic scenario in which not only limited objectives, meaning taking out the leadership, but taking out our key logistics. Those two key leadership and logistics, those are limited objectives. They can be achieved very easily, okay, with certain activities across the scorched earth aspect. So that's why it's so important, I think, for people to understand what we're talking about here today in unrestricted warfare and the essential principles. The unlimited measures that Dr. Yen's already addressed is a trend toward unrestricted employment of measures, but restricted to the accomplishment of objectives. So she said, use any and all means but to accomplish that specific objective. Now, the next one here, Dr. Yin, is very interesting as well. Asymmetry. The authors seek nodes of action in the opposite direction from the contours of the balance of symmetry. Asymmetry, they say, as a principle, is an important fulcrum for tipping the normal rules in beyond limits ideology. Understanding and employing the principle of asymmetry correctly allows us always to find an enemy's soft spots. Mostly the weaker side selects as its main axis of battle those areas, the battle lines where its adversary does not expect to be hit. The center of the mass of the assault is always a place which will result in a huge psychological shock to the adversary. So, Dr. Yan, what's your perspective on asymmetry, the fifth of these essential principles?
Oh, that basically is like the tactics all the cockroaches use to invade our homes, right? But the weakness. I mean, no matter how he describe it in an art way, but that is the principle. So basically, like for example, here we are talking about the law system in the U.S., how it's being understood, studied well by CCP, and then they could take advantage of the weakness. Like when we talk about the Bioweapon Convention Treaty, right? China is part of that. But why could it release COVID-19, develop it, release it, and cause a pandemic, and also cover it up? Because they realize that the soft spot here is that no matter WHO or UN or the surveillance institute like NIH, Johns Hopkins University, they can do nothing to hold China accountable if China violated, because China is the permanent member of UN National Security Council. So the thing is, China can veto all of this kind of decision. And also China could infiltrate to manipulate this cross-national organizations or Americans, the authorities, right? So as long as China can manipulate the key points in this system, China could manage to make the unrestricted bioweapon. And another way is,
So what's interesting there for our audience to understand here as well is what Dr. Yin is talking about here is the tactics of the cockroaches, for example. When we're talking about logistics. So think about using the weak spots and identifying the weak spots in our logistics. There's no protection on our critical infrastructure. It's too vast and too wide. Okay. So from an asymmetric perspective, that's one of the weakest links. Take a look what happened with the Keystone Pipeline, okay, and the Russian hackers. They shut down the whole East Coast for weeks, for 2 to 3 weeks before the ransomware was paid and something like that. Think of the East Palestine, Ohio disaster, the railroad, and the spillage there, and the lack of really good response. China sees these different things. Take a look at the balloon, the spy balloon Dr. Yin talked about, and they flew that over. The lack of response. All these are specific incursions to help map the battlefield, to help map the areas where asymmetry can be applied here in the United States, okay? Because in the United States, people think we're a sanctuary and that nothing can happen here. That's so wrong thinking. Remember 9/11? Okay, the 9/11 Commission said we had a failure of imagination. Well, what Dr. Yin and I are bringing to you today is not a failure of imagination. We're telling you what the truth is and what can actually be happening here, because we need to understand from asymmetry and other stuff. And I'm sorry I interrupted you, Dr. Yin. You had something to say on the asymmetry?
Oh, yes, sir. Actually, I just want to make additional comments that, for example, when they try to manipulate public opinion, they don't need to control all the media. They can infiltrate to certain mainstream media, like New York Times and Washington Post. CNN, definitely they have their own allies or their agents working inside. And they could also, on the other side, for Voice of America, this is very important agency to let Chinese people know Americans' policies and situation in Chinese, right? And let Americans know Chinese but they have infiltrated and almost totally controlled that place. So what you hear from the Chinese commentators, the analysts, they invite mainly the big dissidents. And also what Chinese people hear from American side can be already kind of attenuated in their reports. So then that help the facilitate CCP's cognitive warfare. So these are all the asymmetry. They don't need to help control everyone. They don't control every scientist during the pandemic. They don't control every journalist during the cognitive warfare. But the main point, like the awarded journalists, some directors, some Nobel laureates, that's enough. They make huge impact.
Well, so let's use COVID and China flu as an example, Dr. Yin. Look at their asymmetric methods and omnidirectional approach after the release of this. They had a massive propaganda campaign. They had their stooges already here in the US who were already covering up for themselves. Okay. They had people like Dr. Fauci who were also covering up what was happening. Okay. And so they leveraged all those different things to then provide a great pause and distraction for months. Okay. For months. Okay. That's part of what we're talking about here. This is what cognitive warfare, unrestricted warfare is about. It's not about kinetics. It's about affecting and influencing to the desired outcome for limited objectives of what you want. Winning the war without having to fire a shot. And look what they've done to us in our economy. Look what they've done to us in the murders and the millions of people who died. Okay. And according to the Heritage Report that Dr. Yin and I talked about on a different time, $18 trillion impact. So these are all critical things here. Now, when Dr. Yin and I come back from break, we're going to continue our discussion with minimal consumption as the next essential principle.